And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101, the weekend edition. Politics 101, wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from Guyana, beautiful evening here in and around the East Coast. Welcome to Politics 101. I'd like to thank all of you, all our loyal viewers. Would like to thank you and welcome again to Politics 101. What a wonderful program last night with Vincent Alexander. We got a lot of feedback from it, and we are grateful to all of you for the feedback that you've been giving us. Um, the This week we of course focused on that speech by Mr. Ravi Dev, and on Wednesday night we had Vincent Alexander and Pastor London, and then Apostle London, and then last night we had Vincent Alexander, and we are going to continue to zero in on that speech because I think it allows us the space to grapple with some very important issues in Guyana. I noticed um, uh, one letter in one area of the press. I think it was in the Guyana Times. Somebody wrote berating me for dealing with the issue and challenging us to invite African business people to come to Guyana. Um, the letter, of course, was important for what it omitted um, more than what it said. Welcome to Politics 101. We had a Padre G dropping by this week to give us a peek into their strategic plan, and we're gonna have them back next week. We're gonna have them back next week. But for now, good evening, good night to you. All those of you who are joining us from Europe, welcome and good night because it's late in the night there. Good evening to you, Winston, Ingrid, Matthew. Good evening to you. Good evening to you, Sandra. Regana. Welcome all of you, all of you. If you're joining us from our Caribbean, from Brooklyn, New York, from Toronto, Canada, wherever you join us, whether you join us from Atlanta or Texas or South Carolina, it's good to see some people. I saw some sisters and brothers from Chicago who were here. Our sister from Chicago, I ran into her at Sister Clementine Marshall's wake and funeral. Uh, uh, um, Sister Francis Yvonne Jackson. Um, Big shout out to you. Welcome to Guyana. And a couple of other people I've seen. Welcome to Guyana. Today I went to the reflection ceremony at the Parliament grounds for Ashton Chase, and went there to represent our party, the Working People's Alliance. And Ashton Chase, of course, died earlier this week. And he was cremated today, and there was a ceremony at the Parliament grounds, and I was there. This week, it seems as though it's all over us. It's all over us. Tomorrow, one of my friends, my older friends from Boston, two of them. Tomorrow, Brother Sandy is going to be buried in Buxton, and then the following day, Brother Karma. It seems as though people are dying all around us. Every day souls are passing away. But those two brothers are my friends, were my friends, older than I was, but uh, very philosophical guys and very philosophical men. And you wonder sometimes the men and women of our communities, if they had a chance to go on to university, what they would have done. Just remarkable, remarkable. Condolences to the families of Sandy Adams, and Carmel Lewis, and one of my very good friends. One of my very good friends was married to Sandy, Danette Booker and Dennis Booker. That family married into the Adams family. And we will try to see how we will cope. Welcome to Politics 101. Good evening to all of you. Good evening to all of you. Good evening to all of you. Good evening, Corinne. Good evening, Lester. Good evening, Mr. White from out there on the East Bank, Grove. And I met some sisters from Grove last week on the picket line when the Secretary of State was here. If any one of you in the audience, good evening to you. Good evening to you. And welcome to Politics 101. Good evening to you, Cecile Lockhart. Good evening to you. Good evening to you, Sister Denise Booker, and my good friend, Valdine Kendall. Good evening to you. We are continuing our struggle. As I was leaving the Parliament buildings to make my way home, because I had a meeting at 1 o'clock, I was parked 2 blocks away from Parliament buildings. And I tell you, as I walked between the Parliament building and where my car was parked, about 2 blocks away, going past Ashman and going towards that church. I think it's St. Philip's Church there. I was parked somewhere in that vicinity. So it was 2 blocks. And I can tell you, as I walked 2 blocks, I was stopped by at least 10 people. At least 10 people. As I walked around the corner from Parliament buildings, as I was making the turn, a lady was making the turn. And she looked me in my face and said, "Dr. Hines." I said, "How are you?" And she said, "I want you to stop and listen to me." I said, "Okay." She said, "You don't know me, but I know you." I said, "Okay." She said, "I read in the papers this morning where 2 young men who committed rape were sentenced to life imprisonment." She said, "Dr. Hines, tell me how this can be a fair place." And she gave me that lecture. She gave me that. She was angry. She was angry. You can see it was a normal working class woman going about her business, but she saw me. And I told her, yes. And she looked up into the sky and she said, "God up there, no, he's not sleeping. God not sleep." And as I walked towards my car, about 9 other people stopped me in that short 2 blocks. Others said hello, but I'm telling you, the ones who stopped me to draw my attention to that very item in the newspaper. First of all, they say, well, people don't read papers. So that's the first story. It is obvious that our people are reading. And secondly, that all of them could have recognized that story. When I usually read newspapers at night, yes, St. Philip's or Kingston Methodist, one or two, whichever one come first. I think it's St. Philip's that come first. And when I opened the newspaper last night, early this morning, about 1 o'clock, which is when I would read the papers, and I read the Kaito News, and the Kaito News had that headline: two young men sentenced to life imprisonment. One would not get parole until 30 years. I remember reading that news story, and tears almost came to my eyes. Rape is a very serious crime. And the issue for me and the issue for those people who stopped me today, and I suspect the issue for all of you who saw that item, it's not the sentence that was given to the two men. It is the fact that someone in power was accused of the same offense, but that person never saw the inside of a prison, never went before a judge, never went before a jury. But two men accused of the same crime, had their day in court, and they were given harsh sentences. It is the inequality that those people stop me today pointed to. Some with rage in their eyes, some with tears in their eyes. The man sending coconut water. I was about to pass, and he called me back. He said, come and touch my flesh. I went back and I gave him the fist bump because his other hand was full with his money that he was selling. And he raised with me the same issue. And he looked up into the skies and he says, that man up there doesn't sleep. We shall overcome. That is why I'm using the title of that battle for our show tonight. We shall overcome. We are not treated equally, but we shall overcome. And as I walked away from his stall, there was another man waiting to go to Linden. And he was calling me even before I stopped with the water coconut man. And I went over to him and he shook my hand and he said, you see that thing in the paper today? I said, yes, I saw it. I said hello to the other people in the bus. They were waiting to fill up to go to Linden. And their faces expressed the same outrage. Sisters and brothers, we are not living in normal times in our Guyana. I had just come, as I said, from the funeral service for the late Ashton Chase. And there they were leaders. All those who spoke were people close to the PPP, in the PPP. And there I was, I listened to all the wonderful and lofty things that they had to say about our Guyana. And as I left that compound, which they called, my brother Ralph Ramkoran, who spoke, referred to it as the seat of our democracy. But as I left there, for the ordinary people who stopped me to talk and those who lifted their fist in the air, one brother give me the V sign, the victory sign. For all those people, there was nothing democratic about the life they are living in our Guyana. We are living in a terrible country. We are feeling the inequality. We know that things are not equitable in our society. And as I drove away and through the city to my next meeting, I began to reflect on the almost 5 decades that I've been involved in political struggle. And as I reflected, I began to think about what could be done to ease the stress and the strain that have been visited on our Guyanese people. What have we done? What have we done? The one young man at the corner of Hatfield Street who said to me, that he couldn't watch the press conference that the president gave yesterday when he realized that they only allowed one reporter from each news entity. And then they restricted that one reporter to one question and perhaps one follow-up question. The young man at the corner of Hatfield Street. The night before in Buxton, my friend Ozzy, who asked me, what is wrong? David, what is wrong with the president's head? And he too referred to the press conference, but he referred to what he called the nonsense that the president was talking. Here we are, they're talking about democracy as we are sending home Aston Chase. But what democracy there is when poor men are sentenced to life imprisonment, their entire liberty for the rest of their life, for the next 30 years. Being found guilty of an heinous crime, a crime against children. One of them was accused of raping a 15-year-old, another one a 13-year-old, and they were sentenced. Harsh sentences. Another man accused of the same crime, another child, and he never saw the inside of the Brigham lockup. Much more, he never got a day in court. In many regards, the DPP found them not guilty. She sent back the file saying that it's not enough evidence. Assumingly, she asked the police to do more. So there was not enough, according to her. By the time they were finished, the young woman would have said she doesn't want to pursue. But her statement is there. Her statement is there. And the director of public prosecutions, instead of saying more investigation, but let's charge in the meantime, she had the discretion to do that. She has the discretion to do that. She did not use that discretion. It meant, therefore, that she took it upon herself to become judge and jury, rather than allow the system to work. She stopped the system from working. But these two young men, life imprisonment, the system worked to condemn them. But the system was stopped from working for another man because he's a man of power. This is the dark time. Martin Carter says, this is the dark time I love. All around the land, the brown beetles crawl about. The shining sun is hidden in the sky. Red flowers bend their heads in awful sorrow. As I look in the faces of those men and women who stopped me on the streets today, I saw the anxiety and the strain in their faces. Ordinary working people trying to make a living in our Guyana, but are bombarded every day with the abuse of power. We have to do right by our people. I'm calling on my fellow activists, leaders, whatever you call yourself. This state of affairs cannot continue. We are killing our people. They are killing our people. They are killing our people. The media, as I was saying that press conference, the president talked for 70 odd hours and only took questions for 50 minutes, 70 odd minutes, sorry, and only took questions for 50 odd minutes. And who was sharing the press conference? Not Kwame McCoy, not one of the PPP persons. It was our friend Kit Nascimento. Kit Nascimento, you remember, who said that Ogunse, Rickford Burke, and myself are the three most dangerous men in Guyana. And remember, we were wondering, what is Mr. Kit Nascimento's stake in all of this? But we now see he's the consultant. We now see that that attack on us was a defense of the elites. As you all remember me telling Kit Nascimento that I speak on behalf of the many while he defends the interests of the few. And we now see why Kit Nascimento jumped on me and others, telling the media how many people to send and how many questions to ask. Is that not a dictatorship? You are dictating to the media. So many people must come, and so many people must ask questions, and so many questions must be asked. And you look me in my face and tell me about democracy? Guyana is a democracy? Democracy is not only about how you were elected, but it's how you govern. More importantly, how you govern. How you were elected is what we call the procedure. How you govern is what we call the substance. Procedural democracy and substantive democracy. If you listen to them, they tell us democracy is free and fair election, full stop. First of all, were the elections free and fair? We beg to differ. But even if the elections were free and fair, that is not the sum total of democracy. It is what you use your election, your quote unquote democratic election, to do. If the substance of your governance is bulldozing people's homes, that is not democratic. If you use your governance to let your people not face the law, if you circumvent the rule of law, that's not democratic. If you dictate to the media how many people they can send, how many questions they can ask, that is not democracy. If you distribute the resources that come from our patrimony in an unequal way, that is not democracy. Democracy is about democratic procedure that leads to democratic substance and democratic outcomes. Sisters and brothers, we are living in the worst dictatorship in the post-colonial history of the Caribbean. And we in the Caribbean have been guilty of undemocratic governance in the past. How are you going to tell the media? Stabroek News was allowed one question. And the next morning, the Stabroek News pages, a fellow named Randolph Prasad and a fellow named Kit Nascimento, they have letters in Stabroek News. Stabroek News allow them 2 letters, and they allow Stabroek News 1 reporter and 1 question. I'm talking about that fellow, Randolph Prasad. I took a long time to mention his name. He's one of the chief propagandists of the government. I understand he works out of the office of the president. And he has a letter in everyday newspaper. And he accused the Stabroek News of banning his letters. I noticed Stabroek News is carrying his letters now. And he had a letter in today's papers attacking my elder Iusi Guyana. Guyana had written a letter. God bless Guyana, the last of the founding fathers that is still alive. And Guyana wrote a letter pointing out to Exxon. Exxon had said that it invested its money in Guyana's oil. And so therefore, the returns that it got, it is because of its investment, insinuating that Guyana invested nothing. And the wise man from Buxton, the sage of Buxton, wrote a letter pointing out to Exxon that the oil you are investing in is Guyana's oil. So Guyana is what? The primary investor. So says Guyana. And Guyana is right. To say that Guyana is not an investor is wrong. Guyana is the primary investor because it's Guyana oil. Guyana invests oil. Exxon invests money. It takes 2 to tango. That's all Guyana was saying. And so the returns from the investment must reflect the input of the investors. What does Guyana bring to the table? It brings oil. Almost 1,000 barrels per day. Is taken out of Guyana. And Guyana made reference to Africa. When the Europeans sat down at the end of the 19th century and divide up Africa among themselves, the mad scramble for Africa. Mr. Dr. Randolph Prasad replies to Guyana. But he doesn't say, I agree with Guyana, or I disagree with Guyana. He goes to Guyana language, says Guyana is talking about neocolonialism. And Guyana head is stuck in the past. And some people never change. First of all, he's trying to paint Guyana as anti-Exxon. Then he's saying, Guyana is a revolutionary of the past. My words. And that we must forget about the past. And then he proceeded to tell Guyana what Guyana must look at. And he quoted some figures that were quoted by Irfan Ali the day before. So here's what the fella is doing. First of all, he's double dipping because Irfan Ali mentioned the same numbers that he mentioned, and Stabrook News covered those Irfan Ali's press conference, so they carry it in their news section. So he's now using the letter section to say the same thing that Ali said. It's called double dipping. But more than that, he doesn't answer Guyana's question. He doesn't say, I disagree with Guyana, that Guyana is a major investor. First of all, Guyana did not address anything to the government. Guyana was correcting the Exxon man. But here is a government spokesperson replying to Guyana by not addressing Guyana's question, but saying to Guyana, you mustn't talk in a certain way. I want to say it tonight. Guyana did not sacrifice almost 80 years of his life to Guyana to be subjected to the so-called rebuke of people like Randolph Mossad. You cannot touch even the hem of Guyana's garment. What do you know of Guyana? There's a reason why they constantly attack Guyana. All of them. Guyana represents some tendencies in our politics. He represents morality in our politics, anti-corruption, never thief government money. His life is an example of selfless service. He worked at the Guyana Marketing Corporation for nothing. Didn't have a salary. He was in the committee to develop the plans to start the Co-op Bank. He worked for nothing. He was chairman of the Land Reform Committee in the 1960s. He worked for nothing. Political integrity he represents. Guyana also represents Black consciousness. It was he who, as the head of ASCRI, launched the Black Cultural Revolution in Guyana that is responsible for us African Guyanese naming our children African names, having a sense of ourselves, wearing the shiki and afro and all of that. He changed his name from Sidney King to Eyusi Guyana, which in Swahili means Black man of Guyana. Guyana represents the conscience of Blackness. That's a second reason they attack him. Guyana represents the poor. And the powerless. He was a government minister. He was parliamentarian. He was all the big things. He never left his flat, his bottom house flat at Buxton back down side. He lived among the poor all of this time. His was not just black power for the sake of black power. It was black working class power first and foremost. That man is an example to all the rest of us who are involved in politics. And they attack his very name. They're attacking us. I'm going to attack them back. I was at Sister Marshall's wake 2 nights ago. And a lady, I think her name is Mother Aisha, she said her name was, and she pulled me aside. She said, Dr. Hinds, I want to ask you one thing, one request I want to make on you. Please use your influence and try to get Mr. Guyana's family for him to come home so that we can see him and hug him up and love him up before the ancestors call him home. She said, I'm talking to you because I think you are closest to them and closest to him. She told me he has made too much of a contribution to our country for us to wait until the Maker calls him for us to say thanks. Mr. Hinds, please, can we bring Brother AUC home so that we can say thanks to him? And then she told me about all the things that he did. She passed where I was sitting another time, and she touched me, and she said, please, don't tell me, please, I have made a request to you. And as she was leaving the wake that night, she came across again. I was sitting with Vincent Alexander and a WPA sister, Cheryl, and two other sisters at the table. And she said to me again, I have given you instructions. And here is these little short-tail boys looking for the little place in the sun, believing that they can talk anyhow to Guyana. Let me make it clear. Guyana is not beyond reproach. Guyana will be the first person to tell you he made mistakes in his political life. But you have to earn the right to talk to Guyana. And Randy Posada has not earned that right to talk to my elder in that way. Randy Posada, take me on. I'm a professor just like you. Take me on. You and me on the same shelf. We are flatties. Guyana is a large bottle. And when you go in a rum shop, you don't see Flatty and Ras bottle on the same shelf. Guyana doesn't drink rum. He never drink rum in his life so far as I know. So he may take offense to my example. But what I want to say is people like Randy Posada, they're not in Guyana's class, as the villagers would say. You can't put your foot in Guyana's shoe. Leave him alone. He said something. He said Guyana is a primary investor in our oil. Say, brother, you see, I agree with you. Or, brother, you see, I disagree with you. But you don't tell Guyana what he should read. Guyana has read more books than you will ever dream to read. These little nothing boys. They got 2 degrees next to their name, and they tell themselves that they can talk to people anyhow. Guyana never changes. You see, they don't want us to talk about the past. But every time they open their mouth, even at the funeral today, every 2 minutes, rigged election and Burnham dictatorship. They can look into the past, but we can't look into the past. That's the kind of society they want us to live in. We have got to take on these people. Just as we have together taken on Ravidev, these people lecture us on how we must conduct our lives, our political lives. Ravidev always talks about how his people came from India and work hard. This insinuation that black people don't work hard. He quotes Mr. Hoyt, that Mr. Hoyt tell you that when Friday night meet, black people just jump the fence for one party instead of walking. They all wash their mouths on African people. So because African people don't do business, can't do business, then it makes no sense to spend money in giving them business opportunity. Economic outcomes are based on economic opportunities. If you don't get business opportunities, you are not going to be able to become part of the entrepreneurial class. You have to have opportunities, equality of opportunities. The assumption is that if you don't give some people opportunities, you're not missing anything because they don't know how to do business. They like to party, they jump in fence instead of walking. And the people from the superior culture, they know business because they were able to conquer the lands in Southeast Asia through their business. And they're invited to come to Guyana, get their cake and eat it. That is to come to Guyana, exploit the resources of Guyana using their God-given business acumen. Guyana is wide open, says Mr. Dev. Never once mentioned that African people and Amerindian people live there. And so the attack on Guyana is an attack on those strands of Guyanese politics that Guyana is an exemplar of. God had to recognize the talent and the breadth of knowledge of a man who wrote the party song Party and the Working People's Alliance. The man who gave our cooperative republic its name, the Cooperative Republic, AUC Guyana. Brother Hamilton Green called me today. He said, David, did you see that letter in the paper? I said, yes, Ami. He said, okay, I'm checking. Sisters and brothers, we're up against people who have a grand plan for us. And they're relentless about it. They're going to break the law to make that grand plan happen. Our politics have to be multifaceted. Our politics have to be electoral, because elections are the ways by which we can constitutionally change governments. We've got to work on that front. And we don't want a trade-off. We must not want biometrics, but not a clean voters list. We want and must want a clean voters list and biometrics. We must fight on the electoral front, but we have to fight on the democratic front, the economic democratic front, that is the distribution of our resources. I went down to the back of my village a couple of days ago, and some young men were at the back there, and they shouted at me, Mr. Hines, Mr. Hines. I said, hey, we didn't forget the $5,000, you know. They were talking about the WPA's cash transfer request. I was moved. Here were ordinary little boys hanging out. They're obviously unemployed. But their consciousness has been pierced with our proposal of direct cash transfers to people as a supplement to live their lives, not handouts. You see, there are people who are fighting for a renegotiation of the oil contract. And we are with them. But we are saying that if we get a renewed oil contract and more of the dividends come to Guyana, we still have to face the distributive aspect. Will the larger chunk of the money that comes, will it go to the working people? Will it go to the Guyanese people? Or will it go to the elites? It is clear that the PPP is using the oil money to keep itself in power, not to develop Guyana. We are talking about developing Guyana. We are talking about investment so that people can be lifted out, that they can lift themselves out of poverty. If a woman can repair her home and make it a more comfortable place to live and to sleep, if she can send her children to school and don't have to have them on the road selling snacks during the school period, the school time. If she can open a small business or she can expand her small business, that's a recipe to get out of poverty. To be able to feed herself and her family, to house herself comfortably, and to house her family. It is a recipe how to get out of poverty. I'm not saying that the government should start giving people the $10,000 and $20,000, but we know that giving you $10,000 now and a $20,000, that is not going to lift you out of poverty. I'm not against a little handout here, but you cannot develop people through handouts. In fact, you're making them dependent on those handouts. So we're not saying that the government mustn't give you a little small piece. We are saying more than that. Because of the way the market works, if you put too much money and too little goods on the market, you're playing with trouble. You can't oversaturate the market with too much money. So you're saying that you can't give the public servant workers too high a salary because it will lead to inflation. Okay. But give them a cash transfer. And you will see what they will do with it. The Guyana government, the PPP government, is using the oil money to keep itself in power. Look at the billions of dollars they spent to buy a few votes in the Black community. That's what they're using the billions for. Well, men in the Black community go to bed hungry at nights. They're not concerned about alleviating hunger. They're concerned in giving you a little small piece and give you a box of cook-up rice or Chinese food. We are interested in developing your capacity to lift yourself out of poverty. We are up against it. Next year, March 2024, CARICOM is slated to introduce universal movement of labor. Right now, it's only some skilled labor is allowed to move in between the Caribbean countries. According to the leaders at this meeting, by March 2024, all Caribbean people, regardless of your skills, can now move from one Caribbean country to another without being harassed. And of course, if you are moving, if you have free movement of all labor, it means that you have to guarantee that when that labor moves, it has access to things like education and healthcare. What that would mean, therefore, is that if you move where employment is, because labor will move where the demand for labor is. If you are a carpenter and there's a demand for carpenters in Antigua, that's where you're going to go. But now when you go to Antigua, you don't have to hide in the shadows and worry about being sent home, you will have access to education in Antigua and access to healthcare in Antigua and all other services. So we are upping the pace of regional integration. We have a terrible attitude towards Haitians, for example. Guyana is going to get more wealth than the other Caribbean countries. We have got to prepare ourselves for migration to Guyana. And we do not want the government to be selective about who comes to Guyana. The president announced that Spanish will become mandatory in schools. All right. When I was a boy in high school, we had to do Spanish. Whether it was mandatory or not, we had to do Spanish. I did 3 years of Spanish from Form 1 to Form 3. And if you went into the arts, you did more Spanish there. If you went into the science, I don't think we did Spanish over in the science stream. I think I was pushed into the science stream, not because I love science, but because I think I passed physics, chemistry, and bio. And once you pass that, people of my generation know that once you pass physics, chemistry, I think I tried not to do well in physics. But anyhow, I end up in the science stream, not because science was my thing, but because I passed them. But so the point I'm making is that Spanish at that time was already mandatory. Now, we have to monitor and ask ourselves, why are they making Spanish mandatory? I am in favor of it. But when politicians tell you something, always ask yourself what they're behind it. Let me tell you something. In the top 1% of the exam that just finished, the national grade, NGSA, whatever it is, the exam that them children just passed, the top 1%, nobody in the top 1%, no student in the top 1% came from Region 1, Region 8, Region 9, and I think 7. So what he's saying is nobody from the Amerindian areas were in the top 1%. It seems to me that we need to make English and maths and science and literature mandatory in those areas, not Spanish. We need to make history, Guyanese history, mandatory in those areas. Why are they making Spanish mandatory? I am for it. Don't get me wrong. But I'm asking why the politicians are making it mandatory. Do they have plans for people coming from the Spanish-speaking countries in our neighborhood? And if they're making plans to make them integrated into the community, why? Are they assuming that West Indians are going to come here once the movement of all labor becomes a reality? Are they assuming people can come here from St. Vincent and Dominica and so on? And they're trying to preempt that with people coming from Venezuela and Colombia and those places? Is that the plan? We already know what they've been doing with votes in Region 9 and Region 8, with people coming across the border and registering. I am for mandatory Spanish. I remember going to the Curacao and feeling so small. We went there for an academic conference, a whole set of big doctors and PhDs and so forth. And the little girls and boys who were the receptionists at the hotels that we were staying at, they were speaking 4 languages. They were speaking Spanish, they were speaking English, they were speaking Dutch, and they were speaking Dutch Creole, 4 languages, and there we were with our little English. I felt so small. So I am for languages, that we should speak languages. I'm not against it. But I'm asking, why is the government making Spanish mandatory? Why is the government not saying let's start teaching some Swahili in schools? They had already said they were going to start teaching Hindi in schools. What about some Swahili? Sisters and brothers, we are living in terrible times. And they don't want us to discuss these issues. They want us to go away. They're clamping down on the traditional media. And I hope the people, the media practitioners, are fighting. They're targeting the Press Association. They don't want the president to be questioned. But he's a big, bright man. He got a PhD. He got a first degree from where we don't know, but he got a first degree. Why they hiding him? We are in difficult times. And so we've got to build up our consciousness, build up our movement, so that we can get our seat at the table, the economic table, the electoral table, the cultural table. That's where we have to sit, at all the tables, not just the table in Parliament, but the economic table, where the wealth is being distributed. Who gives contracts? We must be at that table where they're giving contracts. Where they're making decisions of what language our students should learn, we must be at that table. Sisters and brothers, we're not fighting to sit down just at the electoral table. We want to sit at all the tables. Brother C. Paul is saying that the USA is planning to push Guyana to take migrants and refugees from Latin America. When you hear these things, don't poo-poo them. Don't poo-poo them. We got to be on watch. And we have to organize. We have to organize into ourselves wherever we live, into groups. Join something. Join something. Join a party group. If you don't want to join a party group, form something. Form some committee. Join something in your community. Man shall not live by politics alone. Join some black organization, form some black organization. Invite people like myself and Vincent Alexander and others to come. Join something, form something. Do not be afraid. Organize ourselves. Organize as opposition. And that includes opposition people of all races and classes. Organize yourself as black people, as Amerindian people, as East Indian people. Organize yourself as young people, youth. There is power in youth. Organize yourself. Tomorrow night we're going to be on, and we're going to be on Sunday night too. We're working over the weekend. We're working over the weekend. Many people have asked for a rebroadcast of last night's program with Vincent Alexander. I think I'm going to rebroadcast that tomorrow at some point. Rebroadcast it, I think, around that time. I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to be on with Professor Clive Thomas on Sunday, because we got to get with teeth into the economy. In the meantime, we are in this struggle together. 2 young boys sentenced to life imprisonment for rape. A government minister did not spend 1 minute in the lockup over allegations of rape. 2 Guyanas, not 1 Guyana, 2 Guyana, masquerading as 1 Guyana. 1 Guyana is the wool they're pulling over our eyes. If 1 Guyana, then all of us should get the Dharamlal treatment. That's all. It's 1 Guyana. Then don't sentence them by to life. Get them off. If it's 1 Guyana, then if rape means that you must get your day in court and life in prison, then subject Dharamlal to that. It's 2 systems. The system for Dharamlal and the system for them boys that they're sentenced to life. 2 Guyana, 2 systems. When they open their mouth and say 1 Guyana, tell them where to get off. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. See you all tomorrow night.